is it's kind of classical, starting to go modern. In the 30s and 40s, you had a kind of transition from old classicism to modernism. So these guys are still committed to that, but it's getting stripped down because you can't afford to build stuff like City Hall anymore. So it's getting really stripped down. So what it is you can see it's a classical fluted column without a capital on the top of it, just some arches, and it serves as a lookout tower. I mean, it's an observation platform. So if you can afford it, you can go up to the top and get a great view out of the bay, but this one is free and just as good, I think. Well, that one's a little bit better, but I mean, this is a fantastic view, and at least for now, you don't have to pay for it. I'm sure that the Park Commission will figure out a way to get you to pay for looking at San Francisco Bay from here. Howard's brother, that was Henry Howard, his brother was a sculptor, Robert Boardman Howard, and he painted some stuff inside, but mostly he's known as a sculptor, and he did the Phoenix up there, the symbol of San Francisco rising from its own ashes, of course appropriate to a monument to the firemen, which this partly is. But the main thing is, it's an observation platform. It's kind of deco, but also classical. And when they built this, they downzoned the whole hill so that there would be no towers that would challenge this. So Telegraph Hill is the first part of the city to be downzoned. I think the height limit is 40 feet. So that's why when you can see Coit Tower from all over downtown, the hills, etc. When you come across the Bay Bridge, as I just did, you know, there it is, symbol of San Francisco. Now, Gertrude Atherton, Lily Coit's friend, the novelist, prolific novelist, who thought she was as good as Edith Wharton, but she wasn't. But she wrote about local stuff. She was very conservative in her own way, and she thought this was an incredible eyesore, that it defaced a Telegraph Hill, but she also thought that about that bridge out there too. Wow. The Golden Gate Bridge had really defaced the Golden Gate. But of course she goes back to the 19th, these women go back to the 19th century. And let's see, what was the other thing? Oh yes, we're only on half of the original Telegraph Hill. Telegraph Hill was whacked off at the top and then halved off on the east side, the infamous Gray Brothers Quarry. That's why the other side of the hill is just a cliff going down. It's very unstable, and rocks are constantly falling off of it, and in a rainstorm sometimes houses will pitch over on the other side. So there are parts of Telegraph Hill that are scattered all over the world because it was used as ballast. Bayfill, but also ballast for the ships. And so it got scattered in Australia, and New Zealand, and South Africa. You'll find parts of Telegraph Hill if you want to do an analysis of the rock. So when the tower was going up, we're in the depths of the Depression. It's 1933, depths of the Depression. And there was supposed to be a restaurant in the ground floor. And then it was decided to actually use a new federal project called the Public Works of Art Project to decorate it, to employ artists to decorate the tower down below. Kind of like a Renaissance salon, because the whole thing employed 26 artists and their assistants to work on the thing, and you'll get to see that, and Peter will guide you around that. He's a great guide on this, but I hope I'm not stealing his thunder. It's a fantastic snapshot of what San Francisco and California were like in the 30s from a variety of artist viewpoints. Most of it's not controversial, some of it was extremely controversial, so much so that because the artists are painting at the same time the San Francisco Maritime Strike, the Pacific Maritime Strike, and then the General Strike. And so suddenly people became very, very conscious of communist infiltration and subversion. And so it was considered that, especially by the Hearst papers, the Call and the Call Bulletin and the Examiner, that there were commies working in the tower. And so the tower actually was closed from, I think it was May to October, ostensibly to prevent vandalism of the murals inside. But Peter will tell you more about that. So it was very controversial, but it's one of the first important federal art projects of the New Deal. We also have the last in San Francisco, and that's the Rincon mural, Rincon Post Office murals, which some of you have gone on the tour of. Those were actually painted by one artist after the war. This is well before the war, that's after the war, and it's the last, and we have the first here. So we've got bookends in San Francisco. Now, how did the art projects happen? Everybody's out of work when Roosevelt comes in on March 4th, 1933. Horrible unemployment situation, almost as bad as today. But we had really visionary leadership at that time, unlike today. And the idea was that we've not only got to put people to work, but they should be at work at things that they were trained to do. And so there's initially, right off the bat, there are two work programs: Public Works Administration, which trickles down money from the feds by grants and loans to build big projects, and the other one is the Civilian Conservation Corps, which puts young men to work at camps scattered around the country to do conservation work. This wasn't enough to get the economy going by the fall, by which time it looked like a lot of Americans unemployed were going to starve and freeze, because remember, there's no social safety net at that time. They're just starting to weave it, but really there's no social security. If you're out of work, you lose everything. You hit the pavement. So Roosevelt, by an executive order in November of 1933, creates something called the Civil Works Administration, CWA. Most people have never heard of it. It's the predecessor of the more famous WPA, which is in 1935. But this early one is quite an amazing agency, and it was work relief. The guy he puts in charge of it is a social worker from Iowa, Harry Hopkins, whom he had really come to trust when he was governor of New York. Harry Hopkins comes in, and his job is to put people to work, and he did. Within 1 month, Harry Hopkins puts 2 million Americans to work. Within 2 months, 4 million Americans, doing everything from paving roads to teaching in schools, building schools, etc. And in that Civil Works Administration, there's a small division called PWAP, Public Works of Art Project. It happened because one of Roosevelt's friends and classmates at Groton and Harvard, from an aristocratic family in Philadelphia, George Biddle, who was a painter, a kind of lefty, traitor to his class like Roosevelt, had gone down to Mexico, worked with the Mexican muralists, Rivera, Siqueiros, and Orozco, and was really influenced by that. Remember, Rivera and Frida Kahlo are coming to San Francisco at the same time, and they're influencing artists here. Our artists are also going down to Mexico and working on murals down there. And so Biddle talks his friend Franklin Roosevelt into having an art project, and that's under Harry Hopkins in the CWA. CWA only lasts for less than 5 months to get people through the winter. Roosevelt and Hopkins did not believe in the direct dole. They felt that if you just give people money, it will morally destroy them. You have to put them to work. Either it's stuff that they already know how to do, or if they don't know how to do something, you train them to do something. And so that's how it worked. So a lot of people think that this is WPA artwork. It's not. It's earlier. And when you go in, you'll actually see a little boy in a niche reading a book, and it says 1933, and it says Civil Works Administration. So that's the tip-off. This is not WPA, but it's sort of in training for the much bigger art projects and more famous of the WPA, and the ones that were done by the Treasury. There was a section in the there were two sections in the Treasury, trap and section. And when you see post office murals and murals or sculpture in federal buildings, that's under the Treasury. It's not WPA. So it gets all kind of complex. Anyway, that's kind of an introduction to it. This is a real treasure. Came close to being destroyed at one time, like the Rincon murals came close to being destroyed. Now we really treasure them, because as you'll see, as I said, part of it shows a kind of idealized vision of people at work in California doing all sorts of stuff. That's what the feds wanted. It's not controversial, but some of it was very controversial because it is a critique of social conditions and capitalism at that time. Some of these artists really pushed the limits. Remember, a lot of these artists were probably not all that radical before the Depression, but the Depression radicalized a lot of artists, and so they start pushing the limits, particularly when they come into contact with Rivera and Kahlo and the other Mexican muralists, because the Mexican government was a lot more open to social critique in the artwork